Hello, I'm Roger Fraser, and welcome again to Gay Liberation Network's Friday show. We're on the eve of a very important demonstration tomorrow in Daley Plaza, and we have guests today, this evening, Kathy Gutekunst and Linda Lowe of the Chicago for Abortion Rights. Kathy and Linda, would you like to say something about yourselves and also about your organization and a little bit about what's going on tomorrow?
Okay. Well, we have a big rally planned that is a counter-protest against the March for Life that takes place once a year. We will be meeting at 12 noon on the southeast corner of Washington and Dearborn to raise our idea that the right to abortion is a woman's right to choose, should not be illegal, and the decision as to whether or not to have an abortion is up to a woman, her partner, and her medical care provider. We want to counter the idea that this is something that the state should be legislating and restricting in any way for women. I'm a member of Chicago for Abortion Rights, and I'm a nurse.
I'm Linda Lowe, and I am also a member of Chicago for Abortion Rights and a retired staff member at Northeastern Illinois University, where I was an AFSCME member. And I hope to see many of our trade union sisters and brothers out there tomorrow as well. This is a right that we won decades ago. In fact, even before Roe versus Wade, there was legal abortion. And now we absolutely have to defend all the gains we have made and make sure that we not only defend them, but extend them so that everyone who wants an abortion can get a safe, legal, and affordable, preferably free, abortion. And that includes everyone. So it's really important to turn out tomorrow and to be part of the discussion we're having here today.
Wow, that's a great opening. But there is a question. Illinois is, it got a Democratic governor. There's a supermajority in both houses in Springfield. Should we be worried about abortion rights here in Illinois?
Absolutely. You know, states have had favorable abortion laws before. I grew up and came of age and active in the women's movement at a time when New York State had one of the most liberal laws in the country. States like Illinois today having laws that say that we'll be safe here even if Roe is overturned is no guarantee of anything. The forces behind the anti-abortion movement are national, they're well organized, and they're well funded. And they're the same forces that oppose Medicare for all, the granting of government funding for health care, public education, and all public services. So we know that what we've gained can be taken away. And we should not assume or accept that Roe is going to be overturned. In fact, most people probably know about the amicus brief of over 200 legislators in Congress this week signed on to that would roll back the gains made by Roe. And yet, nearly the same number have also signed on to a brief that would defend our right. But we cannot rely on the Democrats. Right here in Illinois, Dan Lipinski was one of the ones that signed on to the amicus brief that would remove Roe. And we know that politicians of both parties who have made promises before have many Democrats actually supported the Hyde Amendment, which imposed restrictions on abortions even when it was legal and made it especially difficult for the most vulnerable of women, which is most working women, poor women, women unemployed, undocumented immigrants, and young women, women of color, to be able to access abortions even though they're legal. So, no, we cannot feel assured of anything. What we can be assured of is the fact that the overwhelming majority in this country support the right to legal abortion and under almost all circumstances, and we have to rely on that power tomorrow and in the weeks to come when the Supreme Court will begin to hear the case that threatens Roe versus Wade.
Thanks. You know, you mentioned about the fact that, I mean, in addition to the 1,100 restrictions since 1973 on women's rights. That poor people suffer from, kind of super restrictions in the sense that, they're poor. How much does it cost for an abortion in the state of Illinois?
Well, it depends on your insurance coverage, for one thing. Many places now are currently charging around $500 to $1,000. It depends on whether your insurance covers if you have a medical abortion where you take pills early in the pregnancy and then have an abortion at home, or whether you have a surgical abortion. The costs for surgical abortion you would think would be higher, but actually the costs for medical abortion tend to be a little higher in some cases. It all depends on what your insurance coverage is and how much they will pay for this.
I see.
And one of the attacks on the affordable health care, they're trying to restrict coverage of abortions. If your employer doesn't agree with it, then you aren't allowed abortion coverage.
Yeah. Let me ask you something about these 1,100 restrictions. I mean, it's an enormous number. Can you speak to this? I have heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that these restrictions are so limit access to such an extent, or drive up the cost for clinics to such an extent that, for example, in some states, just our neighbor, Missouri, there's only one clinic left. One clinic for the whole state. Can you expound on that?
Yes, actually, in Missouri, and right now, Planned Parenthood, which operates a clinic in Missouri, they're facing a restriction that would close that one clinic in the entire state. I can go through a couple of them. They're really kind of horrifying when you look at the number of restrictions. 43 states prohibit abortion after a specific point in the pregnancy. 37 states require parental consent, even if you are a victim of incest or parental abuse. 27 states require a waiting period between when the person receives counseling and they have the procedure. The U.S. College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists published this statistic. 18 states mandate counseling that contains medically incorrect information, and they mandate that it must be given to the person before the abortion. It states, for instance, that there's a link between breast cancer and having an abortion. It states that you can have numerous mental health consequences from having an abortion, and it states that the fetus can feel pain, all of which the U.S. College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists says is incorrect. 90% of all counties in the United States have no abortion clinics, no abortion access. And number of these restrictions that have been passed in the past year, 1/3 of all the abortion restrictions that have been passed that have been enacted since 1973 have been passed in the past year. Many states have passed new abortion bans that state that you can only receive an abortion within 6 weeks after your last menstrual period, which is before most people would even know that they are pregnant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's a means of restricting access to abortion without going against the law. All of these efforts are an attempt to trigger the Supreme Court, the newly conservative Supreme Court, to uphold laws, to limit abortion access even further, and to make it completely unworkable if they can't overturn it.
That brings up an issue about many people think that these abortion restrictions and sometimes laws that affect when the abortion becomes illegal. They only occur in these red states, particularly in the South. But can you tell us a little about what happened in Ohio? I mean, Ohio is what, 2 states over from Illinois? It's north of the Ohio River. What's this about heartbeat law? What is a heartbeat law, which is in effect in Ohio?
Yes, so the fetal heartbeat law states that if a new ultrasound can detect cardiac tissue beating. That's not really a heart. At 6, if it can detect a cardiac tissue beating at 6 weeks, then you are not allowed to have an abortion. And since that time, so this is not really a heart. There's no heart tissue. It's not formed into its various chambers, but it is the embryo at that point is actually considered to be an embryonic pole. It's not considered a human being, yet. The fact that it has cardiac tissue where a beat can be, electrical impulses can be signaled, takes precedence over that woman's heartbeat and that what that woman wants to do with her life. And it's another way of trying to demean the choices that women make and to insist that every aspect of society has the right to control what we do with our bodies except us. We are the only ones who are allowed to not be sane enough to choose for ourselves when we would start a family.
And just one point about states that are considered democratic and that therefore we shouldn't worry. And this isn't to single out any one candidate because, in fact, Massachusetts, for example, where there have actually been some liberal health care laws and some point to that as a good example, they have also instituted, or at least a House of Congress has voted on restrictions and extended waiting periods, if I understand some of the charts that we've been seeing correctly. And this is a state, of course, where Senator Elizabeth Warren, and again, I don't just single her out, but I mention it because in a debate in October that 12 of their candidates were present, 8 of them were asked a direct question to talk about how they viewed the fight for abortion rights. And 6 of those 8 could not even use the word abortion when responding to the question. Now, Elizabeth Warren was one of them who did use the word abortion, but she used it to speak passionately and eloquently about what's gone on in the South and how we have to be aware of the needs of some of the very most vulnerable women that we've been talking about right here now. But the problem is there's some hypocrisy in that, because what we need to do is to do as we do when we protest, which is to advocate for abortion without apology. That means that we want no restrictions and we want the sentiment of the overwhelming majority to be able to be heard. And when the politicians do support us and come out and speak on the platform, we welcome them. But the point here that I want to make is that we cannot rely on them. We can only rely on our own power to be out there, mobilized, affecting even the Supreme Court, who we should remember that the Supreme Court that voted 7-2, that established Roe versus Wade so many decades ago, was a Supreme Court appointed by Nixon at the time, President Nixon. So it was our power in the streets, in the workplaces, in the community. That is what gained us that victory, and that's what's going to help us defend it.
You know, that's very, what you've said is really germane for tomorrow. Because, people will wonder, as I say, we've got strong abortion rights legislation here. Why should we be concerned? But it's as you say, there's always the threat that it can be taken away. What's given can be taken away. We must continue to struggle. Tomorrow, I want to remind our audience at 12 noon, Saturday, tomorrow, at the southeast corner of Dearborn Street and Washington Boulevard, we will have a counter-protest to the March for Life type right-to-lifers, reactionaries, people who believe that though corporations, which are persons, don't deserve any regulation, don't deserve any oversight, the most personal decisions that women make with their bodies naturally has to be governed by the state. And if we could go back to this, in addition today, this week, there's been the threat of war, and we want to remind people that there is an emergency response to U.S. attacks on Iran, or really any country, but Iran, of course, is in the crosshairs today. On the day of an attack, 5:30 p.m., on the day of any bombing or the launching of the ground troops, we will meet at Trump Tower and at Wacker and Wabash to protest and try to change that policy. I just want to remind people, because the situation today is so fluid with respect to war, that we've got to be prepared for anything. So thank you for Andy for bringing that to our attention. Okay, let's continue. All of these restrictions and so on. The argument is that they're designed for the safety and health of women. But is there any other medical procedure for women, or for men for that matter, that marshal this much attention
Right.
and regulation and?
No, if only there were more regulation of some of the other procedures. Abortion is an extremely safe procedure, particularly medical abortion, but also surgical abortions. The mortality rate and the rate of complications is minuscule compared to actually giving birth, compared to childbirth. All of these regulations, and for instance, all of these regulations, like there are these TARP laws, Targeted Regulation of Abortion Providers. There's one law that was just passed in Louisiana this year, and has been appealed to the United States Supreme Court. G versus June Medical Services, that states that any abortion provider in the state of Louisiana needs to have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital. Only one provider in the state of Louisiana has been able to obtain admitting privileges at a hospital close by. There are only 3 abortion clinics in Louisiana. The other 2 clinics would have to close, leaving 1 abortion clinic for approximately 2 million women of reproductive age. These restrictions are not for the health, to protect the health of women. When abortion was illegal, many, many women died of septicemia from botched abortions because they were desperate to have an abortion. So their concern is not for the health of women or regulation. This is a way to make abortion unworkable, and so they can eventually demand, well, it's unworkable, every state has a patchwork of regulations, we should just overturn Roe versus Wade. That's basically the argument of these 200 signers, among who one is Dan Lipinski. And so part of it, when this is going to be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court on Wednesday, March the 4th, we're planning a big demonstration both in Washington, D.C. and here in Chicago, hopefully at the Federal Plaza building. So stay tuned for the updates on that.
Yeah, say that again. What date? What is that date again?
That's Wednesday, March the 4th. That is the first day that the U.S. Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on the appeal to this law. And we would like everyone to turn out and really show the amount of support that the right to choose has in the United States today. That the vast majority of people believe that this is a choice women should make themselves. The U.S. is totally going in the opposite from the rest of the world. We were just discussing since the year 2000, 28 countries have expanded the right to abortion. And countries in which who actually have official religions, Ireland, South Korea, Oaxaca province in Mexico, Spain, Cyprus, they have all expanded reproductive rights for women and expanded the right for abortion, whereas the U.S. is virtually alone among a very small group in trying to further restrict those rights.
And I'll just throw in there that it was massive protests in those countries, out in the streets, bringing together all the supporters, understanding that some of the right-wing trends in at least some of those places in Latin America are tied to trying to deny women control over their lives and our bodies. And that is exactly the kinds of forces that we're talking about here in the United States. Understanding our enemy helps us understand the kind of movement we need to build to be able to defend and extend our rights, which is a movement encompassing the millions of people who do support abortion rights in this country, do not want to see Roe v. Wade Roe v. Wade overturned and want to see the right to abortion become more accessible and affordable. And that's what we need to do. On tomorrow, January 11th at noon, southeast corner across from Daley Plaza, March 4th, when the Supreme Court begins to hear arguments on this critical historic case.
Are you folks terribly upset that the balance on the Supreme Court, now that Anthony Kennedy is gone, and by the way, Kennedy was part of the majority in 2016 that defeated a Texas statute with respect to these the need for access to hospitals and admitting privileges for doctors and so on, which, as you say, are just harassing mechanisms designed to close clinics, not to make them safer and so on. And yet, these same people who talk about law and order are defying the court by passing legislation in the states that are directly in opposition to this decision. So my question is, with Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, clearly anti-abortion bigots, are you worried? Are you desperately worried about the overturn of Roe v. Wade?
Well, again, we're certainly concerned and we have to be mobilized. That does not mean that it's a given that this will happen. In fact, the justices are not impervious to public opinion. What we think and how we express it matters. Even in a narrow sense, people like Chief Justice Roberts and possible others on the court are known for taking seriously the issue of overturning precedent. And this would certainly be that when we're talking about Roe, the law of the land since 1973, and the indisputable fact that it being there has saved lives. It has saved lives. Women are not dying from back alley abortions. More women have access to abortions. And we simply, to put it simply, cannot go back. And most people know that. And what I believe is that it's time to demonstrate that loudly and massively. Yeah. So just a couple words on that. We need to build the type of movement that everyone who believes in the right to defend abortion is involved. And this means the ones most vulnerable, immigrants, unemployed, working women, women of color. What we saw in the streets of Washington, D.C. in January of 2017, when the population here in the United States and around the world was outraged by the election of Trump. President Trump was being inaugurated, and there was an outpouring of sentiment for control of our bodies. And what was really incredible, I thought, as a participant in the march in Washington, D.C., but this was true all over the country and the planet, is that built on the consciousness of the women's movement over the decades, for sure, but it also was on an even higher level, I believe, because there was a link in signs and speeches everywhere to black women's lives mattering, and no human being being illegal, and no Muslim ban, and all the things that were raised to the fore at that moment were tied to women's rights being under attack and abortion rights being among those rights. So I think we need to show that that is still true today by powerful displays of solidarity in the streets and the communities. And lastly, I want to say, even in the workplaces. As a retired member of my union, AFSCME, but knowing that many unions, especially in the public sector, where so many people who both work in the public sector and are recipients of the service are the ones who desperately need the public funding for abortion rights and all other services for that matter. We are on the books of most of these unions, and many private ones too, of being for women's reproductive freedoms. But what we need to do now is to act on those those resolutions of record and mobilize the membership of trade unions alongside of women's rights and black rights and immigrant rights organizations to be out there defending this right. That's the way we won Roe v. Wade in the first place. That's the way we're going to defend it. Can't say it often enough. This is important alongside of childcare, equal pay, maternity and family leave, all the issues we have fought for and won. And it can be and will be true, I believe, for defending abortion rights and extending.
I just wanted to say one additional thing. I think showing some of the slides on here of previous abortion rights actions is really inspiring, because you see the mix of people who come out and who feel strongly enough that they would come out. And I've been at a lot of these demonstrations in the middle of January, and they're very cold. But you see the number of people, religious organizations, unions. Two of the endorsers of the Action for Tomorrow are National Nurses United and the Women's Committee of the Chicago Teachers Union. And so we're trying to get as many groups and other affiliated members as possible to come out tomorrow and to be out there on the streets demanding this.
Solidarity forever. You know, this is, let me just say again, counter-protest against the March for Life rally. The passion and excitement that you folks and eloquence you've demonstrated is just going to be transferred till tomorrow. Let's show that once again before we leave. Again, it's a counter-protest against the March for Life rally, which will be in a Daily Plaza, 12 noon tomorrow, southeast corner of Dearborn Street and Washington Boulevard. And let's be there, and let's support the abortion rights in Illinois and elsewhere. Let's go back one more time to that. Yes, the emergency response to attacks by our government against any country in the Middle East, but particularly Iran, which is in the crosshairs, 5:30 p.m. the day of the bombing. At Trump Tower, Wacker, and Wabash. And once again, I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
Thank you.
It's been a very, very, very...
See you out in the streets.
See you in the streets.